And here we are. Good evening, Flagstaff community, friends, supporters of the Lived Black Experience. Welcome wherever you are. And if this is your first time joining us in 2022, Happy New Year. And I'm putting it out into the universe that this is the year for change. And so, uh, whatever we are seeking to change in our personal lives and our communities, we're still keeping the 7 principles of Kwanzaa. And so, with that, the Lived Black Experience intends to make change not only in our personal lives, but in our communities and wherever we find ourselves in these sacred spaces. Also, I'm still celebrating, and I think the LBE would agree, we are still celebrating the legacy and honoring the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that is sort of the inspiration, the timing of this evening's uh, community dialogue, where I'm so excited. I'm always excited. First of all, good evening, Sister Khara, our resident facilitator.
Good evening.
So I'm excited. This topic, the strength of radical love, and talking about the power of critical joy. And so, in thinking about what and anticipating this evening's presentation, I just want to remind us of, I think, probably one of the most well known scriptures in the Christian Bible, coming from 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self seeking, and it is not easily angered, and it keeps no records of wrong. And so, with that being said, Sister Khara, our resident facilitator, I told you earlier today behind closed doors, but I'm going to say it publicly. I love you. And I'm so very happy to be able to come and share this space with you on the regular. So, with that being said, take us away.
Thank you. And I love you back. Thank you all for joining us this evening. This is, I'm sure, going to be a beautiful conversation, a powerful conversation between two beautiful and powerful women who will be speaking to us about the strength of radical love, the power of critical joy, and its connection to Black resistance. Joining us this evening are Dr. Treya Allen and Dr. Nura Duale. Dr. Tria Allen is a program manager for diverse and inclusive advising practice at the University of Arizona and a faculty member at Pima Community College. Her research covers the intersection of Black women in education, specifically higher education. She is the curator of underground retention programs, Auntie networks, and most recently, the developer of an African American Studies program at Pima Community College. Dr. Nura Duale has worked in higher education for 25 plus years in the areas of multicultural student affairs, international education and exchange, student retention and innovation, graduate school preparation, undergraduate research, and STEM equity grant management. She earned her bachelor's degree in political science from Williams College and her master's degree in language, reading, and culture from the University of Arizona. She collaborates with a wide network of faculty, staff, and administrators to create future-facing inclusive programs that center the recruitment, retention, and success of students from marginalized communities. Her goal is to spark the imagination and aspirations of students while nurturing their talents and protecting their well-being. Compassion and radical hope are values that inform her work as she believes this generation's future is much, much brighter than their past. Welcome to both of you as our speakers and conversationalists this evening. Just a quick reminder to our audience that as this conversation begins, if you have questions for our Q&A at the end of the session, please put them in the chat and we'll be happy to ask them at the end. But for now, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Khara, and just the amazing team at Live Black Experience. Listen, tonight we just want to have a dialogue on these ideas of like radical love and critical joy. And I think one of the important things is that as we start this conversation, I want to lay groundwork because I want to very clearly define that radical love and critical joy are not the same concepts as toxic positivity, which just kind of placates and gaslights people into believing that if you just think positive thoughts, then the real tangible results of what you're experiencing will kind of magically go away. And this is not in any shape or form denying that things happen in the world. In fact, what we're saying is when we say critical joy, what we mean by that is we are asserting that, yes, things are going to happen in the day. We may not be in a situation or a time or the place that we visualize or see ourselves or want to be in. But if we are careful to mine these experiences for gems, for tools, for things that we have learned, for even just the smallest hint of progress, then what ends up happening is we radically shift the way that we will see a situation. So I was thinking about before we came on about this idea of how Jewish rabbis do not see a problem. What they see is a crack or the opportunity to fill a crack in a community. So whether that is gun violence or personal gains in your life, this idea of critical joy in some ways fills that crack. And so Nura, I'm going to invite you in here to let's just start with the conversation of like what is going on in our world and in our experiences.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Nura Duale, and I call myself Dr. Tria Allen's sidekick. We're both at the University of Arizona, and I've been there since 1993. I'm originally from Somalia, East Africa. I've lived in the States since 1979. I got here when I was 14. So it's been about a 4+ decade experience of just observing the United States. You think you're living in the United States, and I look back over the 4 decades, and I feel like I was sort of a tourist/observer for much of the time, even though I was fairly young when I came. And it's because it is a complicated culture, and there are a lot of demographics and subcultures and regions to keep track of. And the idea is not to be judgy, and the idea is to sort of reflect each of us, like why we do what we do, right? So I'll show you how, say, critical joy works in my life. When our parents sent us to the United States, my family, we were students, but my mom and dad, who were Somalis, stayed behind. And the country they were living in at the time was Saudi Arabia, and it was not hospitable to females. And we were young students who were trying to get an education. So my dad bundled us up and shipped us to Buffalo, New York. My older sister became a freshman at Buffalo State College. My other sister and I became juniors and seniors in a local Catholic prep school. And so from the day I've arrived, it's been this continuous, why do Americans do this way? And for me, what works is reflection. I think if we can, on any given day, be really clear about why we're doing what we're doing and empower ourselves to claim the reason we're doing what we're doing, then you don't feel so pushed around by life, right? And so in the tough days when we are here as a family, as siblings, now we're all in our 50s and one of us hit 60. America has not been an easy place to be in the last 40 years. But we always go back to, okay, we are the ones who decided to come here. So we've got to figure out a way to make this work. We came as going to school, but each of us, when we finished whatever level of schooling we finished, our student visa ran out and we became undocumented, every last one of us, in different parts of the US. So each of us filed for political asylum. We went through that. Then we went through permanent residency. Then we went through a naturalization process. Then we became citizens, in my case, in '96. And so my experience of the United States has been one where I'm positively and actively trying to stay here. Does that make sense? Even though as a Black woman, Muslim, immigrant, it has not been hard. It has not been easy. And so the way I keep myself buoyed up, the way I keep my spirit going is I have a very real conversation with myself very frequently. If I'm commuting to work, literally practically every day when I'm driving to work, it's a reminder, even though I work in higher education, even though the structures of higher education and the values of higher education are not ones I think that are that hospitable to students who are from backgrounds underrepresented in higher education, right? Underrepresented students, however you want to define them, first generation college students, Pell eligible students, students in any way, shape or form that deviate from the norm, from, that affluent, oftentimes white experience. So when I'm driving to work and my work is to serve those students, right? To hopefully give them an experience that I lacked in college, right? An advocate, an ally, and a friend, and a supporter, and a fierce mentor. When I do that for my students every day when I'm driving to the U of A, I am really clear that it's a choice, and I choose to remain in this fight, and I choose to be of service to these students because this work gives me joy, right? So what I'm hoping this conversation, one of the places I want it to take us, is this is such a tough time for our nation. It's a tough time for our state. It's a tough time for our communities. It's a tough time for our families. The pandemics and epidemics that we're dealing with are all nested. And I know you all know that. But the reason I believe this generation who's coming up, that their future is brighter than their past, is because I specifically look at the African-American experience, right? As an immigrant who, post George Floyd, I joke with Tria all the time. I said my tourism stopped with George Floyd. After that, it was like, raised 2 Black males in America. One is 32, one is 27. And it's seriously real, what it means to embody a Black body in the United States. So there's no more distancing. There's no more hiding in some mental space where supposed I'm going to get on a ship and run off, just fly off to another country. I am here. I am here with you. I am looking for sisterhood. I am looking for community. And what I bring, I think, to each community I'm in is just this very fierce dedication to know what your strengths are, know what your wins are, and hold on to them, and take the movement forward, as incremental as it may be, right? And for the African-American community that I'm always in awe of, I think what Critical Joy does is everything to do with the African-American experience, starting with the Black church, everything to do with the African-American experience, to me, exemplifies, shouts Critical Joy. And I think it's this indomitable spirit that that generations of African-Americans have had in the face of, I come from a continent, and I come from a region of Africa right now that has a long history. Ethiopia has had a long civilization. Somalia has a strong oral tradition. We are nomadic pastoralists. There's all kinds of values that we have about what strength means, and what survival means, and what thriving means, and what overcoming means. But when you think about the fact that I was born in Germany in 1964, and then my father was an ambassador representing the Somali nation, and that we were told as a family growing up that every country we went to, we represent Somalia, like no messing around, no bad behavior. So we did that in Germany. We did that in the 60s. We did that in Egypt from 65 to 68 during the war with Israel. We did that in Yemen from 68 to 70 during a civil war in Yemen. We did that in England from 70 to 75 with the IRA bombing the place all the time. We did that in Saudi Arabia when my father was recalled and basically had all of his property taken away from him. We did that when we were stuck in Somalia from 75 to 78. They took our passports the first day we arrived, and it was a 3-year fight to get out of the country, even though I love my country, right? But my father's politics were anathema to a very severe form of communist regime and military regime that had taken over. And so eventually we find ourselves in Buffalo, New York. But this large extended Somali family that I'm from is found everywhere. They live in Pune, India, and they live in Ottawa, Canada, and they live all over the United States. They live throughout Europe. They live in some parts of the Middle East. And so I know what I'm talking about when I say the African-American experience is not only unique, right? But it's hard for me to wrap my head around what it takes for a community, for a group of people to survive the challenges over 4 centuries. And so what I'm trying to say as a newly arrived American and a newly arrived African-American, the job of white supremacy, I think, is to forever and continuously define down, keep this energy down, continuously shape in a very negative manner what the African-American experience is about. And to me, it's a continual robbing of people's natural connectivity to the strength that their ancestors gave them. And if you want to use a different analogy, and I'll end with this, to me, I just keep saying generation after generation of African-Americans in the United States from 1619 onwards. Think about it. It's the survival of the fittest, right? Anyone who sees themselves as historic African-American, historic minority, as Reverend Jesse Jackson said at one point, as opposed to the newcomer, the post-65, anyone whose heritage goes in that direction, do you not see how it's continuously the strongest and the fittest survived generation after generation? That's who is here. That's who's here. And this is why, at the end of the day, the major fissure that continues to show up in American culture is a black-white fissure, no matter how many other communities there are, right? This is the community that the energy is directed against. And when I see everything that has to do with African-American expression, whether it's through the arts, through the output of the educators that we have, the mothers and the sisters in the community that keep the community together, the survival of what it means to be a black man in the United. When I see all of that, I see strength. I am daily, Tria knows this, every day I say to myself, I know who I was when I was a child growing up in England. I was a kid that needed external validation, right? And I have no idea who would I have been if I was born and raised in the United States. But as needy as I was for external validation, that I was bright, or that I was okay, or that I was a good person, as a small child, as needy as I was for that, and as attuned as I am to my surroundings, I watch my twins who are surviving and my oldest son who's thriving, but I think I would not have as a child. I think I would not have. I know who I was growing up and how I was forever defining what I was feeling and who I was by what I was receiving back from the society I was in any given point. Does that make sense to the community? So I will end there and say, what I see is strength. I see joy. I see a bright future for us. I'm super, super connected to the fact that our past is much, much brighter than our future is much, much brighter than our past. And that can be said for just about any marginalized group in the United States. And I think the existential problem facing majority America, white America, is that they've decided to believe that their future is much, much darker than their past, that their best days are behind them, should they have to live in a pluralistic society where they are equal with us. Does this make sense?
No, it
And
makes perfect sense. One of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking about, um, like this ability to thrive in spite of, and I think this is where the critical part comes in, that we are able to critique the systems that we are in. We are able to say, this did not go well, or this is not happening. But in spite of it all, I still have this joy. I still have the ability to connect and to build community. I was actually also the document that comes up for me is Thomas Jefferson's note on the state of Virginia, where he goes through this diatribe about how Black bodies, they're not learned, they're not as smart as white folks, that they will work all day long and then sit up and laugh and sing and dance with each other as if they don't have to go to work the next day. And I thought, for somebody who does not understand this thing of critical joy, of mining the day for joy, of mining the day for, yes, work was not great today, or this policy is being pushed and enacted in several cases and spaces, but I have a community that I come back to and I celebrate with, right? And that is an act of like resistance. Like, I will not go gentle into this good night. And I think if anybody is listening and they're like, well, why is that radical? Lucille Clifton says, won't you come celebrate with me? Every day something has tried to take me out. I have had no, and I'm paraphrasing, I've had no models. You know, I was born in Babylon. I had to shape a life for myself. And I think this is what you're talking about when you're like, this African American experience, while it is rife with strife and enslavement systems and the continual perpetuation of racism and other oppressions, you know, just white supremacy in general, we see every single day how we are connecting with each other, how we are making and carving out intentional spaces of joy, which does become resistance, which does show up as radical love. You know, it is a radical thing to love oneself when everything around you is telling you you are less than, you are inferior. And that's kind of where I go back, because once you adopt this idea, you know, Dr. King called it beloved community, right? Not as this like utopia, but it's where we are in balance and harmony with each other, where we can correct each other, where I love you enough. Um, I love you as I love myself, and I want us to survive, which means I do critique, which means I do, in love, say, this is not working for everybody, that pluralistic society that you were talking about. And so I just think when we say things like radical love, why it's radical is because we are not supposed to love those who may differ from us, or those who feel like they have um, authority or control over us. And so I think I hear it say like a million times a day, these systems are not created for us. And that is true. But when I adopt this framework of, yes, I can critique this system and mine it for joy, and then take that joy as the energy to push me forward, what it does is it radically changes the way I see a situation. It allows me to humanize those who are ignorant and to allow them grace and space to still be able to make improvements. And that is radical. That is radical when everything around me says that I should hate you. I should hate you right now. I should hate this institution. But I'm like, absolutely not. I refuse to ever lose sight of the humanity that is within you.
That's the key. And first of all, ditto to everything you said. But I this weekend was such a powerful weekend. It was, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday celebration. For those of us who are doing service, that's a good thing. But a good time to reflect for the country, and so much around voting rights. And it was so interesting to me to see how the African American activists that were across the news shows, across the channels, were mostly Black females. And not only was it powerful Black women, but after I listened to what they had to say and absorbed it and thought about it, I come from a very political family, all I could think was, what radical love does, which is what we have for this nation at the end of the day. You can't fight this hard to be a part of a democracy. You can't fight this hard and believe so hard in the Constitution and everything that it gives, because it's been denied to us until 1965. So in other words, we are a young democracy. We really are a young democracy. It doesn't go back to 1776. It really starts in 1965, because that's when the full franchise happened. If you look at it that way, it's a young 57-year journey. It's literally my age, right? This full democratic engagement that we've been seeking. And even then, in the last 5-6 decades, it's been a becoming, and it's being shaped continuously by those who have the strongest belief in the Constitution and America's ideals. It's the ideals that this nation has that allow us to take radical love and critical joy. There's a connection between them. The ideals are very high. America, in other words, is not it's a conglomeration of 50 states. It's 300+ million people. It's all of that. But at its most symbolic, America is an idea, And as an immigrant who's quite critical of the place for 4 years running, when there was a peaceful transfer of power, every 4 years from 1979 when I arrived here, I'd say to myself, well, you know what? I've got to really hand it to the United States. This is a nation full of diverse people with all kinds of opinions, but they manage every 4 years without fail to do this peaceful transfer of power. What it means to not have a peaceful transfer of power in the United States is for the group that was served by the old system deciding that democracy with all of these people is less pleasant to me than autocracy with just us on top, right? You see? And so what is the African-American response? The African-American response is one which is, if you really think about it, critical, radical love for the nation and its ideals, its highest ideals, because it's an experiment. And it's a belief that human beings, right, can intentionally and consciously choose to live in harmony, right? Choose to live in a way that lives up to these ideals. So for me, I find myself tonight in this really deep space of reverence for the political activism of the past, but where it's taking us. And I'm not in the least bit unhopeful. I'm incredibly hopeful, because I think radical love and critical joy, however you might define them, combine to create hopefulness. It's hope that we need. It's hope that energizes, right? Where does the energy for hope come from? It comes from a positionality of radically loving this nation that we are, oftentimes fighting with. And Tria and I talk a lot, and I said to her, my neighbors across the street are elderly. He's a retired faculty, U of A faculty. They're uber conservative Catholics, elderly, sweet people. And we never talk politics, but I am absolutely sure who they vote for, and they absolutely know who I vote for. And every time I get mad at the opposition, I remember this couple across the street that is the heart and soul of our bloc, right? And, I make sure I'm always available to them. And they had the 60th anniversary. We were invited. My husband and I, we went. And it's a determination to say that my job is to not demonize anyone, right? My job is to move my agenda forward, right? And what I think radical love must teach us is that the America that you may have known, or the group of decent people that you felt populated the United States that seems to have disappeared, haven't gone anywhere, right? It's a media system that is lifting up badly behaved actors, right? Clickbait means all day, every day, what must be beamed into our homes are those Americans who are behaving horribly. Night and day, this is all we see. And it's designed especially to strip away from you this sense that there is comity, that we have community, that we can be in community with other Americans, even if we disagree with them, right? It is really a radical thing to only spotlight insurrectionists, terrorists. I mean, when you think about, I will stop. But what I'm trying to say, is, I find that the system we are in right now has been thinking since the 60s and 70s of how to control media, how to control language, how to control visual language. And I felt that, I'd say, after about 10 years in the United States, because all of a sudden I felt that the language we were using as African Americans to speak for our freedom was co-opted by the Reagan years. There wasn't a term that came out of the 60s that didn't somehow get co-opted and blown up and weaponized against us. And I've been waiting for a new language. And I listen to the youth that now are on our campus and the beautiful language that they speak, right? And the way that they are very engaged in not just activism, but self-care. And the way the language of care and healing has made its way into the language of activism. And so I draw hope from many, many streams. One of them is that we are reviving a language of an activist language. I listen politically to a lot of different things. And the thing that gives me most joy is listening to fierce Black women talk about with the work that they do around voting rights. And so I will end with the Kabuki Theater that is currently that Senate discussion, right? The trick is to see beyond that and say, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that 50 Republicans and 2 Democrats say we are against voting rights. That's a heck of a thing to document for history, right? And you use that to radicalize, to energize the weirdly silent majority right now of Americans, right? And not all of them African American or minority. Plenty of, I think, majority Americans, white Americans, are horrified by what they're seeing. But you notice none of us are being on the news. There's not a single person in opposition to the current agenda that's covered in the news. I find that really strange. So we need radical love and we need critical joy more than ever now. But we must not feel that the obstacles in front of us as a community are overwhelming. And the reason we must not and cannot and shall not and will not feel that way is because you have to look at history and say, my ancestors overcame, bigger obstacles. Does this make sense? The very presence of African Americans and what they're up to as a community in all 50 states, right? The very presence of this event that we have tonight is, to me, such an expression of a community that just keeps moving its agenda forward. And so we don't have to make radical love and critical joy something that has to be defined, by professors. I submit to you, we're living it. I submit to you, this community gets up every day and that's what they live. Because you're being asked to do 2 things. You're being asked to inhabit a Black body that America can sometimes even attack and make literally a target of death. And at the same time, have the existential skill to split yourself in half and exist and fight to exist as a free Black female, free Black person on the planet. I don't know of any community on the planet currently that has to juggle those 2 things at the same time.
All these Black women who show up during these conversations and then tap me on the shoulder. I think this idea of the Black community being or demonstrating radical love to a nation, right? To this idea of a nation is very intriguing to me, especially since it is said Black community that has been holding the nation accountable to if you say we are the land of the free and the home of the brave, then show me.
Show me.
And this is how I will ensure that what you say out of your mouth is accurate. And so now I'm watching us continuously, some powers move the goalposts continuously, and we show up and we say no, because we have this history. We have this willingness to pound the pavement. I think of Stacey Abrams, but the person most that I speak, and I speak her name, Fannie Lou Hamer, right? We had a whole president who was terrified of this organically brilliant, illiterate sharecropper from the Mississippi Delta, who was just not having it. She's like, we want voters' rights. And really comes in and finds this is one of the founders of the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party, right? And so she says things like, y'all are worried about the Klan, and we have an entire system here in Mississippi that is starving people, purposely starving people so that they will not exercise their right to vote, which is guaranteed by the documents that you say we reference. And that is a very hard critique. But the other part of this that I want us to sit with, right, is that all of these women, these Fannie Lou Hamer's daughters, if you will, who are in the media right now, who are having the same conversation, are also saying, I love us enough to correct us. I love us enough to hold us accountable. And that is we think it's just activism. And I think you so aptly like coined it better, which is, no, this is an act of love. For whom if I don't love you, I don't chastise you, right? That's what we say in the biblical text, like of this Bible, if you're Christian, that we say is our guiding principle book. Well, if I don't love you, I don't chastise you. I don't correct you. I don't reprove you, as the King James Version says. And so to me, it's just so interesting that what can be named by some as radical racialized behavior, you're always bringing up the race problem, is actually in turn really us loving the nation that we're in. And we're saying, America, we're not even asking you for a lot of the stuff that you have going on in the imagination, right? In the majority community's imagination. We're not even asking you for half of that. We're asking you to honor your word that you say governs this nation, which is so interesting. And that's why we can kind of sit at a TV and look at a January 6th insurrection and go, is this your king? Is this what you say? And so it's very interesting, right, to turn that on itself. And I think in that turn, in being able to define it for ourselves, which is Kujijaguleya, like our ability to self-determine and self-define who we are, that is where we find our liberation. That you're not going to define this, you're not going to co-opt these words. And so it'll be very interesting to see, how are you going to take the words like care and healing and joy and weaponize those? Oh, they're too happy.
It'll be interesting. You're reminding me that who is really free, right? Who is free? You read Heather McGee's book, The Sum of Us, and you see this continual documentation she makes of the lengths that a supremacist system will go to deprive Black people and minorities, marginalized people of a public service or a public good. And it's a continual cut your nose to spite your face, right? And the sickness of the racism is so deep that oftentimes whites aren't aware what they're doing, right? but when you see Affordable Care Act coming, and if it's called Obamacare, it can't be, it's not a good thing. But if it's Kentucky Care, or if it's access in Arizona, it's a good thing. And so it's almost a conditioning that I'm so free of and so glad to not have, that there's a system that I've grown up in and a way of looking at the world where I'm automatically curtailing that which is of benefit, that I've deemed is of benefit to Black people. So think about what this democratic nation, think about what the mythology tells us. The American myth tells us we've been a democracy since 1776. That's what we're being told. If that's the case, how is it that you have never had a national day of voting day? How in 2022 are we have less access to voting rights than we did in 1965? Or as the wife of Martin Luther King's son said about her daughter. Apparently her daughter is Dr. King's only grandchild, born in 2008. So she said on the news, and I just was dumbfounded by how she framed it. She said that if her daughter was born in 2008, and if in 2013 the Voting Rights Act was gutted, right, that in 2022 Dr. King's granddaughter has less access to voting rights than he did at the time he passed away. at the age of 39, right? So what I think what we're about is loving this nation, loving ourselves, and where we find ourselves through this moment of the regular cognitive dissonance that racism and supremacy brings, which is, this is for me, not for you, but we can't really say it, right? It's all, and I think what's happening lately in a very interesting way is what 4 years of the Orange Menace's regime has done is laid bare the blueprint of how it functions. Any right-minded human being who lived through the last 4 years, where every community was under attack, but white men and women, and even white women with abortion rights, literally, we're looking at white males, was who he was sparing. What does it mean to have survived the last 4 years as a majority American, right? A majority American with a brain, right? And oftentimes what I hear people say is, wow, I still believe in the police, but my God, like their pattern of misbehavior, what they're doing is real. There's no getting around that. So it's almost like the miseducation of white people needs to be fixed by white people. And what I think this man has done is he has helped us jump through maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 decades of denial, where a party that has been as corrupted as the Republican Party has been corrupted right this moment would have continued to bamboozle America. But he's taken all of that away. He literally ripped the entire blueprint right off, and all we were left with was this naked power grab, right? Of eventually, I hope you're following what I'm saying. And so the gift of that, thank God we survived of it, and I know we survived what's coming. But the gift of it is that it's given a right-minded white person very few places to hide, right? What the last 4 years have done is, in some ways, made it practically impossible for somebody who will be an ally and is an ally of our movement, right, to be in denial about how supremacy works. I mean, the capacity of the corporate media to maintain the various mythologies in America is so powerful that it took this man being who he is and engineering a power grab to scare the you-know-what out of all of us. The minute that was happening on January 6th last year, do you know what I said the next day? I said, only in America do you have an insurrection around 2 o'clock, putting it down by 6 p.m., right? Congressional people going back to do their jobs around 8 p.m., the vote going down at 2 or 3 a.m., and it's done. So don't be fooled, Americans. The system you all have is a strong system. It has withstood a 4 or 5 year assault, right? And in its darkest moment, right, of all people, Mike Pence, the thing rolled out the way it was supposed to, right? So every single time you feel robbed of joy, robbed of hope in a dark space, look at the situation of the problem you're looking at and flip it around and see if there's a bigger truth and a bigger strength that you are missing. And I say yes. I say.
Nura, you muted yourself.
I say the moment we're at is pregnant with possibility, right? And the 2 things will happen on voting rights in the next little while, right? They'll either reveal themselves to be whom they are for the history books, and we keep moving and rolling along as righteous people, because human beings are not at the end of the day self-destructive to that point, or they'll do the right thing. And all things are possible. But I fail to believe that the moment we're in and the challenges we're facing are going to overcome us when this population, this community has overcome far greater challenges. And that's the truth of it. When your ancestors have survived far more, who are you? Who are you to be laid low? Who are we to be laid low by what we're facing? No, we have to find the ways to get energized. And that's what radical love is about, because radical love energizes. To love your enemy energizes. To love your enemy, to release yourself, free yourself of all of this anger towards these misbegotten people. I am so serious. Who is free, right? I say we are free if we're not all day, every day looking for how we can keep down the other. Who wants to spend their time doing that?
I think Toni Morrison, we all knew Toni Morrison was going to show up at some point. Toni Morrison called, she was constantly questioned about, like, why don't you write about white people? And she was like, I don't write from the white gaze. But then Zora Neale Hurston came right behind her and or before her and was basically like, no, I am not going to present a community that is laid low. I believe radically in the beautiful intricacies of who this people is, where they are going. And I think that speaks to the hope, right? This idea of a hope quotient. And I think it's Brian Stevenson's of the EJI project who says, basically, without hope, we can't even hope to think about justice or joy or loving someone. And so it becomes so vital to protect our hope quotient. I'm misquoting him like all over the place, but it is definitely on a talk on YouTube somewhere. Yep. And so I think about that when we show up every day, when we make the decision to drive to work, to continue to help students, to show forth and show beyond, what we are dealing with, how we support our communities, how we choose to continue with the things that we're doing. We are protecting our hope quotient, because what I know of is this: once we lose hope, lawlessness abounds. Once we lose hope, our ability to see the humanity in other people becomes lost. And that is scary. That is very scary to me.
I think the thing that we're not accessing, and God knows I probably don't want to access it, but there's whatever you as an individual are going through and your take on the moment we're in. And then there is this space. I mean, when you really think about when you think about the bad actors I'm talking about that we see on television every day, when you really stop and think about it, you say, okay, woke up in the morning, obsessed about Obama or whatever, then obsessed about VP Harris, then they obsess about, there's something that's driving their rage, right? And at the end of the day, first of all, even the news, as much as they don't share numbers very much, this is a small minority, right? That is being allowed to set the national dialogue, right? But why do I keep circling around that? The reason I keep circling around that is what I'm saying is the way to organize and structure your life is to look at the things that offend you, the things that repel you, the things that you instinctively feel are negative to your psyche and your soul, right? And then say, I've got to practice the opposite of that. Right? So it really takes us directly to the nonviolence and the entire ethic behind what the civil rights movement was about. That power of love, the power of nonviolence, right? The standing strong in that strength, the remembering that, what is it? The moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. And we can't poo-poo any of those things. We've literally seen them in our lifetime.
Yes.
Right? So I just say it's been a historic, it's been a absolutely, there's a word I've been using. Like, what did the Confucius thing say? May you live in interesting times, right? I keep saying to my family, enough with the interesting times. I feel like from 2007 onwards, the American political experiment has been a fusion chamber, right? Because where their minds broke was when Obama was elected the first time. Then it broke more when he was elected the second time. And we've been catching hell ever since. And the idea is to beat you back into this space that we're not going back into, right? So it's really apropos that we're using the language of the strength of radical love and the power of critical joy. Because to me, these are the things that people are practicing every day to get over, right? Whatever we call them. It is just what it means to be a free Black person in America. There is no way you're not practicing this. And should you not be practicing this, if there is no self-love, today's conversation is about why we need that, right? And I tell my students all the time, and I mostly lately have been counseling graduate students, and they come into this grad chat that Tria and I have Tuesdays at 4 to 5 p.m. And it's last night was the first one for the semester, and they had a big turnout. We were both surprised. But when you have an African-American male in a PhD program in clinical psychology saying it's the neuro track, I'm in the neuroscience track. Oh, it's not just clinical psych PhD, it's a neuro track PhD. Tria could tell I was just totally entranced. I kept going back to him. Oh, and the point is, literally everybody matters. Every single mind matters, right? And if it takes 1 hour a week where we get together, we validate them and we affirm them and we remind them they're exactly where they need to be. And we remind them all they're after is those 3 little letters. If it's the PhD, or those little letters, if it's the MA or the MS, it is doable. It's doable because the generation before you did it. And it's doable because we are here for you. And it's doable because you have no business feeling small when you have achieved this much, right? It is everybody's business to be about the business of cataloging their strengths, cataloging their contributions. All of us got to do that. And there's not a soul who can do that and not, that is practicing self-love. That is practicing self-love. And it allows you to show up in the world in a very different way when you are having this conversation with yourself all the time about what are my strengths, right? We know we're not perfect and we know there are deficiencies, if you will, right? But who starts with what's not working? Always start with what is working. Every single time, in every single situation, you start with what's working. And I think, honest to God, it's the stuff that undergirds radical joy and critical love. You always start with the strength. You always start with what's working. You allow yourself to feel that. You allow yourself to feel energized. And then you've got a better mindset with which to problem solve the crack that the rabbi is noticing.
Yes. So I'm gonna let those be our final words, and so I'm gonna invite Ms. Khara House and Reverend Lewis back into this conversation, because I think where it is just an amazing spot to just be like, what? Mind blown.
Well, that's exactly where I am. Just at that point of mind blown, amazing conversation. Thank you both for all of that. I want to start the Q&A with actually a quote from the audience that drew on one of the points you both made tonight. And the quote was, "Black people love this country so much that we want it to live up to its potential. We believe that this country can achieve life, liberty, and happiness for all. We love this country enough to hold it accountable for its actions. That is the purest form of love." And that quote took me right back to the recent conversation we had, I mean, literally just a few weeks ago, about Kwanzaa and the reminder that part of the guiding ideology behind Kwanzaa was the idea of Black people, the peoples of Africa, both indigenous and diasporic, are stewards of humanity and guiders of civilization. That role as being guiders of civilization or guiders of progress. Part of me feels that as just a great weight, and part of me feels very hopeful in that idea. And I just wonder how each of you view that role in guiding and loving humanity to that point of change and to progress beyond or in spite of the oppressive systems that we see in the nation today.
I feel like there will always be some form of oppression. Always, right? The question, though, is, do I allow myself to amplify that? So there's this thing in positive psychology that says we can do a million positive things, great things that are happening, but it is that one small comment that makes us go, that didn't feel good, that we hyper focus on. And when we hyper focus on, our brains magnify it. And so in that magnification, we create a story about it. We create feelings about that story that we never actually vocalize, like this whole narrative about what is going on. And we have amplified a thing and given it power because we will not speak the actual name of what's going on, or right? So I feel like this is always going to happen. Now, for those of y'all who are like pop culture fans, it's the same concept that we see when we don't speak the name of Voldemort, right? We amplify this individual's power. And what we find out at the end of the movie is he had so split himself that he could not last without this crowd around him that formed like fictitious barriers, but he had no power. And so I feel like when we talk about in a world with all this stuff that is going on, what is it that I actually must give my time to? Because if positive psychology says this is going to happen, and I know this is going to happen, for every like one small negative interaction, it takes like 3 or 5 positive things. And then sometimes maybe a cheering section to be like, come on, girl, get over this. Let's go. We got to get over this. So when we talk about like, what is the responsibility that I feel for this? Here we go again. I go back to Toni Morrison, who says that as you have learned to be free, as you have liberated yourself, your job is to free someone else. Your job is to guide them away from this idea of it's my for and no more. Them crazy white folks. What am I going to say? No, this is still my country. Do I allow one small part of this society to tear down the things that my ancestors have built? Or do I steward it? Do I speak out? Do I dare to say there's a better way? And I just choose to be there rather than to like amplify all the horrible stuff that can go wrong. But what about all the stuff that could go amazingly well? And that includes human beings. What about all of that stuff?
Well, you know, think about this. I find it really interesting that after some of these recent elections, particularly if you are a center-left person, the ease with which majority people say, yes, Black women won the election, they put the country on its back and they moved it forward. First of all, much of that is true. But secondly, if that's the case, then whose country is it? Is it not then? Is it not then their country? And I think for me, I hope psychologically that there's this shift where people are not in the least bit confused about whose country this is. And what I would submit is, given the performance that's going on right now politically in our nation, right now it's the African American community that's speaking up the loudest for the nation. And so for me, it's important that we attend to that flip. It's important that people are really clear that what our community is performing currently is what you should be doing if you believe in democracy. It's what you should be doing. And I think what's really interesting for me is, again, I'm going to draw on my experience as an immigrant. I can't tell you from Buffalo, New York, to the Berkshires in Massachusetts, to Washington, D.C., back to New York City, to Tucson. These are the places I've lived in for a long period of time. I would say to myself, my God, like, how does this actually work? I've never been to a school board meeting. All of it just seems to just work magically. It's incredible, the system that they built here, from municipal government to state government. All of these the apparatus of government is invisible to us. So it's invisible to the point where if you're a majority American, apparently you forget it's there, right? Now, why am I saying that? What I'm saying that is there's a reason every single day I have 2 numbers that I hit: Kristen Sinema's 202 number and her Tucson number. And I was arguing with my oldest son about this, who was saying, we know who she is. There's no point in calling her. And I said to him, listen, when I finished college, I ended up working for a law firm in Washington, D.C., a huge, powerful law firm. And it opened a little consulting company, and APCO, the consulting company, hired me right out of college as a researcher. So I look around and I see that this young man and this young woman who are in these offices, and they pound away and they generate newsletters. They generate 3 newsletters every month for the timber industry. One's called like the Lumberjack Association of America. One is the Timber association, 3 different newsletters. My job was to take these 3 newsletters to Congress once a month, right? It's complete lies. They've made up 3 full newsletters to fool Congress. And I would go to 535 offices in my little heels, and I would deliver the 3 newsletters. But you know what I would also deliver? The newsletter that was produced by my group, the Somali National Movement, that was against what was happening in our country. And it was called Somali Horizon. So I'd give the 3 lumberjack things and the Somali Horizon newsletter. A year later, when our defense minister came to the United States Congress begging for more arms to destroy our people, we went to Congress and we argued against him. And Joe Kennedy, who was representing the Boston area, said, "Who's that heckling up there?" And back then, in the late 80s, early 90s, you could go to Congress and, as a citizen, observe the dialogue. And he said, "Who's up there?" And we said, "It's the Somali National Movement." And do you know what he said? He said, "I thought you all were defunct. We stopped getting your newsletter." And every last one of us who produced that was undocumented. And here's what I need you to know as citizens. Every single time you call a congressman or woman, these congress people, every time, their little legislative aides, one of their most critical jobs is to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they extrapolate each of our calls to the tens of thousands. And you know who understands that? The right. The center right understands that. That is the moral majority. They also understand that there are 7,000 precincts in the United States. And all they have to produce is not a huge, overwhelming win. 50% plus 1. 50% plus 1. That's the entire formula. For Pima County, 50% plus 1. Flagstaff, 50% plus 1. And that's what they drive towards. But when you put all of their wins together, it seems like a big win. Why do I say all of this? What I say is, I tell my children now, apparently democracy is hard work. Apparently you have to make sure you participate in every single vote. The days of all of it being invisible are over. And I just think it's like the pandemic. Possibly it's the new normal. I really want young people to feel like civic engagement is just not a chore, but a must. Civic engagement is a must, because when we cede the space to others, look what we get. We know that the group that we're fighting is a small group, but they are well represented, right? And so we've got to continuously overwhelm them. So I don't know, Khara, if that helps at all, but I would flip it and say our job at all times is to sit in our truth, which is a community that is forever doing a lot with a little. A community that is 13% and leading the nation. I'm telling you, this is mind-blowing. I study this all the time. I just observe African Americans and wonder, day in, day out for 4 decades. I go, I could not have done that. How is this done? How is this done? And so I show up in these spaces this energized because I am saying what supremacy is about is tamping that energy down. The energy is anarchic. The energy is powerful. The energy is transformative. The energy is healing.
Thank you both. You both opened with the idea of joy as a choice and as a form of resistance. And it made me think of the quote that we often hear from James Baldwin, where he says, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all of the time, and in one's work. And part of this, and part of the rage is this: it isn't only what is happening to you, but it's what's happening all around you and all of the time in the face of the most extraordinary and criminal indifference of most white people in this country and their ignorance. To me, paralleling that thought with so much of what you talked about tonight, it feels like a demand to cultivate joy intentionally. And so it raises the question for me of what is joy in the life of the conscious person of color, the conscious Black person in America. Is it a duty? Is it a survival mechanism? Is it a weapon? Is it all of the above? What does joy do in the face of that almost conscious state of rage?
I honestly think it takes us out of ourselves. Um, they used to say in the civil rights that even if I don't make it, I may not go with you, but we are moving in this direction. And so what it does is it it takes me out of my individual feelings, and it makes me say, what is the reason why you show up here every day? And I'm very clear that my mission is not the same as the University of Arizona's or PIMA or whatever organization that I work with. My mission is to make sure that students who say, I want to have this type of life or I want to obtain this type of education, that then I surround them with networks of support. I tell them the truth so that they can get to where it is that they need to go. Because I'm very clear that I can't do everything. I'm not a politician. I am not an accountant. And so whatever territory I have, that is what I must work with. And so when we intentionally choose to, all right, this stuff is going on. Yes, here's the critique. Yes, this is not going well. Yes, you lied here. You have not fulfilled your promises. You still owe my family from the land and the heirs property that you stole through legal systems that amplify and support and maintain racism and white supremacy. But even with all that understanding, I will throw my head back and laugh at the most ridiculous of things, remembering not to take myself too serious, remembering that my life is fleeting. And for the moment that I have been graced on this planet to do whatever my hands find themselves to do, I will do that with all of my might. Because if not, then I become a part of the white noise that moves nothing forward. And I just think my ancestors have paid too much. We used to say things like, my mom would say, I am the hope of my ancestors, but you are the dream. I hope that my kids are able to own land and do all these other amazing things that I didn't have the opportunity to. But you are a dream. So as I sit here with initials behind and a doctorate in front of my name, this is something that my grandmother, who is 93 years old, could only that was her wildest dream, right? That one of her kids would be able to have access to this. My grandmother, who has a second grade education, right? And so I think when we balance that out, James Baldwin is absolutely right. To be in that consciousness all the time is enraging, but I have to move outside of that to push the next generation forward, to prepare a launching pad for them, because nobody can launch safely off of rocks.
Yeah, I think, Khara, the answer was in you. It was right there, right? It's all of the things that you said it was, but it is an antidote, and it's more than that. It's what we need to manage the rage, right? I'm not in denial, right? The reason I said that I felt like I crossed this Rubicon from tourist observer to calling, to meaning it when I said I feel like an African American woman is I think I have been in like 18 months of absolute rage over how my institution is handling certain things, right? I in the work that I do, I'm here to support graduate students of color. And we have currently a system that is light on systems of accountability. And so the lack of systems of accountability, I've never thought of it that way. Let's see if we can do a parallel between where I found myself in our nation. Think about this. What was enraging me was, wow, there is no consequence for bad behavior. And what happens when there's no consequence for bad behavior? The graduate coordinator, observing that graduate student being abused, panics and gets small and doesn't say anything. The faculty do not take on this badly behaving person and they disengage. The department head is acting like la 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 la. I don't know how you even got to a place where sanctioning people is not a thing. So for 18 months, I've been saying them, this is toxic. This is insane. This is contagious. This is performative. This is the Trump moment. This is Trump behavior. How is this okay? A middle school teacher cannot get away with this, right? Still no answer. So I found myself yesterday in a meeting that was about postdocs and what do we do about postdocs? And the meeting was civil. And then I went into one of my rants about this topic, which is until we deal with the climate, until we deal with the climate on our campus and in our departments, and not all departments are messed up, don't get me wrong, but those places that are not well, until we deal with that, we're going to have the retention issues that we have with folk, all right? So is that not parallel to the country? We're all as citizens now just watching badly behaved people for 1 year misbehave and just lose their minds. And here we are slowly now observing the reckoning that is to come. Knowing that Watergate happened in 72 and people were locked up in 75. That's the pace of US justice. And why? Why? Because if you're moneyed and if you're rich and if you're powerful in America, the likelihood you can weasel your way out of something is high. So they've got to fact check their business 7 ways to Sunday if they are the Department of Justice. I'm okay with that. I will take slow and sure and put them in jail than shabby and fast. It's all connected. Badly behaving things is badly behaving citizens, badly behaving senators, badly behaving systems is rage-inducing, right? And so after 18 months of that, I feel like I was not even coherent in meetings, and maybe I wasn't coherent tonight. But I said to myself, so how is it if you're born and raised in this country that you're supposed to manage this rage? I almost had no tools with which to manage it. And I had to keep going back. I'm like, who were you? I know you came out of the womb as an optimist. It's a plus. I mean, I didn't work to get this happy. It's an orientation. But where did Nura go? And what's with the rage? Right? And it was because I was taking on the pain of my students during that 1 hour, allowing them to get on with their business, and I had no place to take it in a system that doesn't want to do anything about it. And I discovered the system wants to sit in it the same way America wants to sit in it. But you can't sit in it forever, is the point. You literally can't. And so there will come a breaking point. And the breaking point is the one where when majority people are discomforted enough, where U of A loses enough folk that they then choose to change their climate. Because here's what I said to them. I said, I run undergraduate research programs for underrepresented students. All 32 showed up and they saw an alumni panel of our diverse alums in PhD and master's programs across the country. 7 of them came to volunteer their time. And every last one, when they were asked the last question, what's your next plan, said, I went into the PhD program planning to go into academia, but that's not what I'm doing now. Here's what I'm doing now. Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 7 said that. So I took that to the meeting of upper administration and postdocs. And I said to them, we have crossed the Rubicon. You have been creating a hostile environment long enough for folk who are postdocs who are trying to get a tenure track position by cutting out the tenure track positions every economic downturn, that they've read the message very clearly. And guess what this super bright generation of 23-year-olds and 26-year-olds and 28-year-olds are doing? They're saying, just like with the Great Resignation, I've got options. So I said, it's not 20 years from now, 3 to 5 years from now, you all realize that the postdocs exist, that the people of color with these degrees are out there. They choose not to come to academia. So unless academia wants to leave this medieval guild system where they haze the newbie person, haze them until they become a master's holder or a PhD holder, young people don't need it. And I tell you, they had nothing to say, and I felt as usual I was ranting, right? Because the passion is real. And I just said to them, they got the message, right? And they don't want to be here. And that's a good thing, because you will change so that you can attract them. So I think the way to manage the rage is to consciously, as Treya said, step out and understand that joy, right? All of those moments that our ancestors chose to exercise their humor, to exercise their body, to exercise their vocal cords, to sing and to dance and to be. All of those moments are cumulative, right? And we've been given tools to use to manage the rage. So I'm not saying don't be rageful. If you're a sentient being in 2022, there's no way, right? But we have to as equally access the joy And so with our experience, it seems there's always lots of duality. There's a lot going on always, right? All these tensions of two things that we have to balance. But I think it's part of what makes this community buoyant and indestructible.
Beautiful. Thank you both. Both of your bios incorporate the work of networking and connectivity. How do we center or recenter connection to survive in this day and age? It seems like particularly over the past 2 years with COVID-19 going on and a pandemic that drove so many of us into isolations and lockdowns and quarantines, we've seen this growing narrative around the perceived divisiveness in the diversity dialogues. That argument that as we're talking about diversifying, what we're actually doing is dividing. How do we shift the focus back to the reality of beauty and diversity and joy and inclusion and that need for coming together to be able to create change?
Yeah, you can go first.
You are here. What happened here?
I was like, this is all Nura.
Yeah, there comes a point where you just have to name it and call it and see it for what it is, right? I'm just going to talk about my poor institution. When I say they just choose to sit in it, they do. But when I look at those upper administrators who are 5 levels above me and paid to problem solve, I want to tell you they're frozen. I spoke to one on the phone before I came here, and I said to her, "I'm sorry, yesterday, was I ranting?" And she said, "No, Nura, you're one of the few people that speaks these truths in every venue that she's at. And thank God for you. You're one of the most important voices on campus, blah, blah, blah." But, at the end of the day, I'm like, I think you all are paid to solve this problem. So I think we're on the cusp of change. Don't get me wrong, Khara. I think we're on the cusp of change. But it's almost like everybody's thinking it's somebody else's job. Certainly, if I look at the institution at the U of A, literally they're all thinking it's somebody else's job. And here's what happened. For the first time ever, I've never done it this way before. So I did my little rant, and it was my truth. And I finally in the chat put a useful question. And I just said, is there a document that lists the roles and expectations of the faculty member or the mentor and the roles and expectations of the mentee? And don't you know these upper administrators in the chat, all of a sudden there are all these links. Yes, of course there are. I said, so why aren't these things made transparent? Why aren't these things given to the student the day they arrive? Do you not see that doing the right thing protects both the professor and the student? Think about it, right? It gives the student a structure, a set of principles by which they can understand what is happening to them. And they say, Professor such and such is really violating bullet number 6. And it gives the department head and the college dean, I am not about ever demonizing a soul, a human being. I see no productivity in that at all, right? I'm about calling what the problem is and asking us to fix that problem. Because I really have never been interested in shaming and blaming others. There's a whole bunch of stuff that belies that. And one is perfection is to Allah, not the human. We are ever evolving, but perfection is to the divine. So if I know I'm a flawed being and I'm evolving, who am I to judge and point fingers? Right? So what I'm asking the institution to do is fix the problem, not the person. You see what I mean? And so back to diversity and I just think right after George Floyd, there was that moment, right, where so much of the majority culture was all about that support. And if I had an elastic band, I would say, tick. And now it feels like they've slammed right back into this defensive crouch where they don't want to hear it. Tria, last night, did I not say to you, I sense defensiveness and like, la, 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 don't want to hear it anymore? Khara, I say that too is a moment. Because One of the things we have to point out is the way that Heather McGee does so beautifully in The Sum of Us is that this kind of ism, this kind of oppression, this anytime you have systems that are oppressing other systems, that you as the oppressor, right? You as the oppressor collude in this and you too are harmed. So the harm that comes from, and this is the language of healing that our young students are using and activists are using, right? Harm that is done and what can be done to bring about harm reduction. Right. And I see, older people roll their eyes when they hear that language. But for me, I'm all like, exactly like what Treya said. This is healing language, but it names it. And it calls out what's happening. There is harm being done. Right. So anyway, I kind of went off track. But Khara, do you understand how I was trying to respond to what you said?
Yeah,
The question you posed?
absolutely. Thank you. I want to wrap us up with one last question. I really loved the focus that you both put on the use and power of language, and how that, and a call to revitalize the language of activism, as you put it, Dr. Duale. What do you see coming for language, or for the language that we use for activism, or the language that we use for change? How do we shed a light on where the language is now, be it in the media or in the legislature and so forth, and then guide it towards a better language that's going to help drive us forward or drive us towards the change that we're on the cusp of, but not quite there yet?
I am very ill-equipped to answer that, and I'll tell you why. I have an ear for it, and when I hear it, I'm in love. I'm just sort of like, look at how that young person just strung together all of those sentences and said it in ways, this is what I've been waiting for. But I don't speak this language whatsoever at all. And so every week when I write my announcement, my grad chat announcement to the graduate professional students, every week I try and practice this language, right? And so I'm not doing it using the phrasing that I hear them use, right? And I think it's because I'm just not speaking to them all the time and reading their material all the time. I'm using how I express myself, right? And then I'm cherry picking the pieces that speak to me, right? To reflect it back to them, right? And so the kinds of ways in which my writing is changing is that I'm allowing myself to use language about, I'm very directly saying we're here to affirm you, right? Because I think affirmation, anything that's affirming, is a part of this language. Things that validate an experience, right? Which is like to counter the gaslighting. So the validation, when we're writing to validate that somebody, when we're writing to affirm, I think that's kind of the reason what I'm hearing, this language that I'm responding to is hitting me so hard is it's beautiful, but it's also healing. Years ago, U of A had this conference called Black Life Matters. 2016, maybe 2018. It was a 3-day conference. And just, they chose not to spend money on fancy food or anything like that. Like bus tickets and cheapo airline tickets were sent to young African-American activists. I had nothing to do with it. So Social Behavioral Science, College of Social Behavioral Sciences, and Maria Moore, who was running the MLK Center. But every minute that I could for 3 days, I would run to the ballroom and sit in the back and just listen to these young folk talk. And I will say this, powerful older African Americans in our community showed up and were disordered by what they were hearing. Cisgender this, and they complained to the dean of students, who was a Black woman, who said to me, Nura, what happened that day? What's going on? Should I really listen to this? I said, no, don't listen to this. This is the new community rising. This is how they speak. This is a beautiful thing. And it's just a moment. I've been sensitive to language all my life. And I knew that we needed language that would penetrate, right? And so I trust the language as it evolves to continue to not just penetrate, but to call out the defensive crouch that decision makers are in right now. The defensive crouch that possibly feels like the majority community is in. But the confusing thing about life in the United States is this, and I will leave you with this. Having lived in countries that were both scientific socialism is the strongest, highest form of communism there is. That's the 3 years of Somalia that we lived in. Then we lived for 2.5 years in Saudi Arabia with a form of Islamic Wahhabism that really just is wrong. So we've lived in many different countries, in parliamentary politics in Britain. I come to the United States, and the thing that is most astonishing to me is the capacity for the American experiment, because that's what it is. It's an ideal and it's an experiment to be held, to live up to its ideals through language, Khara. Right? So every now and then they'll co-opt the language, but not forever. But I will say this for you all to understand. There has never been a form of propagandizing against a group of citizens the way the average American citizen is experiencing the delivery of information today. Like, we're seeing something radically new in the human experience. This misinformation at the scale that it's happening. Misinformation that is disordering the lives of educated people to the point that they run away from vaccinations. You follow me? Like, what we're living through is misinformation and propaganda at the same time. So if you find yourself to be the kind of citizen that can take a moment and look and see through the misinformation, see through the propaganda, right? Use critical thinking skills and hold tight, good for you. And the reason that African Americans, more than most communities, can do that with far more ease than the majority communities, we've had to be bicultural, biliterate, have double consciousness, live our worlds and read their world at the same time. You follow? So it's hard to bamboozle this kind of person. But I will close with this. I have such, what is the word? It's not pity. I feel so badly for so many of our citizens who have been so snowed by the misinformation, right? And so let down and set up by their isms, right? All of the sick mythologies that they believe in have colluded to put them in this death spiral. Do you follow? So in some ways, when I say we are more free, as weird as that is, that's what I mean. It is a free thing. It is a beautiful thing to be able to read the world correctly as it is and to not get bamboozled to this degree. And that it can happen in a country this educated blows my mind daily.
Dr. Allen, your closing thoughts.
Well, I was just taking everything in, and I'm going to say we need to call a thing, right? I think a lot of time, I think we're right now in the middle of a world that is hurting. So the ability to locate our feelings, to locate what is harming us, right? And then to access the language of healing. And a lot of times that means I'm going to have to make a sacrifice between I want the answer or the justification for why you did this, move beyond that to just say, I want healing. And that's a shift, right? Because us asking for the justification does not get us healed. And this is Dr. Anita Phillips' work. But me asking for healing, right, says, you did what you did, or what's going on is what's going on, but how do we get to the place of healing? And so being able to name a thing, being able to say, this is how this makes me feel, this is what I need to access. I think that's where we need to be if we're moving towards this idea of critical joy and radical love as a precursor to liberation for all people.
Beautiful. Thank you both. Thank you so much for this conversation, for the conversation that you opened us with, and I'm sure the conversations that this is going to inspire for those who joined us tonight. And hopefully that will continue on beyond this session. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us tonight. As always, it's a pleasure to be with you and to be part of these conversations with whoever is watching. We know that over the past year of doing these dialogues, the conversation has moved beyond Flagstaff to embrace all of Arizona, to travel across this country, and to travel across the oceans. We know that there are folks who are watching both domestically and abroad. And so we thank you for continuing to join us and be part of these conversations and being part of naming those things that will help us to, as we've said tonight, find liberation. We hope that you will continue to join us as we come back later this month with more sessions. Until then, we wish you a beautiful evening. Go out and be well. And as always, go in grace.